Welcome into College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. I'm Emily Proud, and you might be wondering, who the heck am I? Where is Adam Finkelstein? Don't worry, he is still here. I'm sitting in his host seat, and he will be the analyst today. So let's welcome him in. 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting, Adam Finkelstein. Fink, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for joining me. This is fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Lot to talk about. It's pretty rare that we get actual exciting storylines out of the NBA All-Star game, but thankfully those media availabilities have really kept us engaged, particularly what NBA Commissioner Adam Silver had to say on the future of G League Ignite. He said this, quote, "I'm not sure what the future of Team Ignite will be because before there was a hole in the marketplace that we thought we were filling before doing that. Now my focus is turning to earlier development of those players." So lay it out for us. How would you describe the state of Ignite right now?
You know, what's interesting about this whole thing is Commissioner Silver cited NIL is the reason why Ignite may no longer be viable. But he's coming off a season in which they signed Ron Holland and Mattis Buzelis last year, who were two of the top 7 prospects in the country. And that was in the thick of NIL. So to get those two players over other NIL opportunities really shows that they were able to combat that part of the market. Interestingly enough, they also have depth to match that. In fact, they have 7 draft eligible prospects in this class alone. That's more than they've ever had. So if this year's team is any indication, they are not having any problems recruiting as of right now. Now, 2 years ago is a little bit of a different story, but they are having other challenges, and those have been especially well documented in the days since Silver's comments. The first one is that, quite honestly, they're just not very competitive within the G League. As I said, they have 7 draft eligible players. That makes them very young. And remember, even in the G League, a lot of these players are former college stars. They're still among the very best at what they do. And so Ignite has been, quite honestly, they've been losing a lot of games, and they've been uncompetitive in a lot of games and been catching a lot of kind of negative publicity in the process that I think has just kind of compounded some of the issues. Then you have people who are digging into the player development track record. They're talking about how guys like Jalen Green are not necessarily the stars that we thought they would. Scoot Henderson hasn't been as good as expected this year. Jonathan Kuminga, although he's taking off this year, it took longer than expected. And then there's others like Deshaun Nix, Michael Foster, who just have not panned out at all. I think some of those criticisms are unfair. I think really not everybody is going to be a complete success story, but there are some are certainly valid. So there's a lot of different variables. Another one, quite honestly, is that it's just really expensive to run this team. When Ignite first started, it was $125,000 per player. NIL did change that because now to get these guys, it's $500,000 plus. And so the operating costs of a program that is getting pretty consistent negative feedback from the media are higher than ever. So I think when you combine all these factors, NIL becomes a real easy answer of like, hey, this is why it's not working. But the reality is there are a few different factors that are all kind of combining to make this something that, to the NBA's credit, they're saying, let's see if this is viable long term. And I should also say, I think the part that people are not talking about enough is how just candid Adam Silver was. And it was throughout the whole weekend. He obviously wasn't happy with the All-Star game product. And he didn't say Ignite is going away. He just said they're going to reevaluate it. And I think there's more reasons than just NIL though.
And it's not just this G League Ignite program. His larger point was about youth basketball system in this country in particular and how it really differs from what we see abroad. There's so many great examples in other countries of these development leagues for the NBA. It seemed like G League Ignite was supposed to be that, but what are some of the differences that we see in our country versus abroad?
So that's a terrific point, because if you really go back and look at what Silver said, about 3 sentences was about Ignite and about 3 paragraphs was about youth basketball system. And so he's talking specifically about getting the best of the best ready to play in the NBA. And he said they're often very skilled, but when you're talking about skill, that means what they can do with the ball in their hands. And it's sometimes the greater team concepts that aren't taught quite as well here in the States as they are abroad. Some of those feeder systems, particularly in Europe and other parts of the country, where there's more emphasis on passing, on moving without the ball, on learning concepts, on learning defensive coverages. You see a lot of that come out in the FIBA play, especially this past summer when Team USA lost. It comes out in the continuity that a lot of these international teams have in FIBA play. But those are the concepts that I think across the board, everyone agrees that we could do a better job collectively within the US of trying to address those. It's just tricky trying to figure out how exactly you implement that change and make it something that the kids are actually going to want to buy into. That's where it gets tricky.
So how do you do it? It sounds like that needs to get done.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it becomes a collaboration. You heard Commissioner Silver say they've worked with the NCAA in the past. Well, one thing the NCAA has learned in recent years is that when you try and go against the sneaker companies and tell these kids what to do, that's a losing proposition. So you really got to bring in the sneaker companies. I think Nike in particular is an obvious partner because they are the sponsor both of the NBA and of USA Basketball. The EYBL obviously has a lot of brand recognition. And if you trace the roots of the EYBL, and when I say EYBL, I'm talking about the grassroots version. This year they have a scholastic version as well, basically during the high school season. But when EYBL was first born, there was required coaching clinics for every team that participated and different benchmarks that the coaches had to meet. I'm not sure how much that is still in place, but what I can say pretty definitively is that if you look at some of these programs and you're trying to target the best of the best in the country, you're not going to be able to do it without collaboration from the sneaker companies. And that has to start with Nike because they are the sponsor of the NBA and of USA Basketball. So you've got to get them on board first. And the NCAA is all well and good. And sure, they should be part of it because they could benefit from a greater teaching method throughout our youth. But the sneaker companies, I think, are really the key. And if you try and do it without them, as I said, the NCAA has tried to do things without the sneaker companies in the past, and it has proved to be a losing proposition when it comes to the top 1% of the 1%. And from Adam Silver's perspective, that is who he's talking about.
LeBron James actually kind of spoke on this matter as well, pertaining to one and dones, and with his son as well, Bronny, who's a freshman at USC, and he said this quote, "It's up to him. It's up to the kid. Obviously, we're going to go through the whole process. He's in season now, has the Pac-12 tournament coming up. We're going to weigh our options and we're going to let the kid make the decision. We're not going to judge what his fatherhood stance looks like or his ability to parent his own son. But as it pertains to one and dones, looking at Bronny James in particular, he's averaging 5.7 points, 2.9 rebounds, 2.6 assists, while shooting 36% from the field and 27 from three. So what one and done conversation is there to be had right now with Bronny?
Yeah, let's say this. If his name were James Smith, there wouldn't be a one and done conversation. This dates back 2 years now, in February of 2022, when LeBron said, "I'm going to spend my last season playing with Bronny." And in the 2 years since, he has doubled down on that with some subtle variations, but he stayed consistent to the overall theme, which is that he wants to play with his son. And he cited Ken Griffey Jr. and Ken Griffey Sr. as the example, and good for him. It would be a tremendous achievement in what has been a historic career by all definitions. But as I said last year, I think when you judge Bronny simply on his own merit and not based on all that goes with being LeBron James's son, his NBA upside is much less clear. He would not be in the one and done conversation right now if his name were not Bronny James. That is not a knock on Bronny. To the contrary, one of the things I've been very consistent with is the humility that we've seen from him over the years, to have all the expectations that you have when you're LeBron James' son, the social media following, the crowds who follow you, and then the challenge of going through that cardiac incident. And thank goodness he came back and he got cleared from that and he's healthy. And that should be, I think, the best storyline of the year. But instead, we're back to this one and done thing, because even last month, LeBron said something to the extent of Bronny could play for us, meaning the Lakers right now. And what I remember vividly is he said, easy, easy. again, this is a guy who's coming off the bench for USC, playing behind Boogie Ellis and Isaiah Collier, and this is a USC team that is struggling in the Pac-12. So I just don't know that I would co-sign that. Far from me to disagree with LeBron James, but as I've said many times before, I've yet to meet a dad who is completely unbiased, even if they claim to be. And Bronny just doesn't look like a one and done. Now, I think it's very possible and probably likely that he still declares for the draft after the year. And if you have followed LeBron James over the years, you should know that this is a man who dictates more front office moves than maybe any player in NBA history. He's been setting this up for 2 years. And I think it's very possible Bronny James is in the NBA next year. But as I said last year, that won't be based solely on his own merit as a prospect, but on what comes with being LeBron James's son.
Well, that's the interesting part about it. I think back to going through all the Arch Manning madness when it came to him coming out of school, and just being a Manning obviously elevates your status. But it's unique with Bronny in that he literally could be tied to what his dad does in the NBA. And I know there were some rumors over the last few weeks about potential trades with LeBron James. Yeah. So if teams are kind of hoping to get this 2-for-1 deal with the Jameses, I mean, what's the likelihood another team looks at Bronny as a way to get to LeBron?
Well, LeBron has an opt-out in his contract after this season. And initially, his statements from 2 years seemed to indicate that the 2024-25 season would be his last. Based on his miraculous ability to seemingly never age, that no longer looks to be the case. I mean, at the level he's playing at, and with the apparent minimal, if any, deterioration we've seen in the last couple of years, he now looks like he can play. I mean, I'm certainly not going to put a date on it, but it doesn't look like this is a guy who's approaching his last season at this point. He's still one of the very best players in the NBA. So he can opt out of his contract this year, having nothing to do with Bronny, but because he's going to be eligible and in good position to then sign another multi-year deal. And this is a guy who's making $50 million a year right now. So you add another year, another 2 years of that on top, and what we thought was going to be one more year now turns into multiple years. And that also gives him the ultimate leverage on the Lakers or whoever else to say, hey, before I sign this, my son's coming here, whether it's a first round pick, second round pick, whether you work out something in free agency. Because I think this is the nuance that isn't talked about a lot. You know, for all that trade talk you mentioned with Golden State going into the deadline, one of the things you heard is that they didn't just call the Lakers and say, hey, would you be willing to trade him? The Lakers said, well, go talk to him about it. You know, Rob Pelinka, I was really kind of struck by that Rob Pelinka said, well, you can talk to him about it and his representatives about it. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. I'm not reporting on anything that's the specifics of it. But it was very clear that LeBron wanted to remain in LA. And I think it's not going to be a surprise, given he has this opt-out, given he's in a position to sign a multi-year extension, that he's then able to leverage the Lakers into bringing Bronny in to join him. The question is if there's any other team out there that say they have a second-round pick that has a minimal chance of turning into an impact player, historically speaking, they say, you know what, maybe we'll try and grab Bronny and see if that impacts LeBron's ability to come here. Now, again, that's more hypothetical than anything, because with LeBron and Clutch, those conversations would happen kind of behind closed doors before you get to that pick. But it certainly is an interesting scenario that could only potentially add to the leverage that LeBron can put on the Lakers to say, hey, Bronny's coming with me next season.
Yeah, which is absolutely nuts to think about a player having that much leverage, but that's what happens when you're LeBron James and you continue to drink from the fountain of youth. It definitely gives them some time to fulfill his dream of playing with his son one day. Adam, thank you so much for letting me step in today. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed this conversation. As always, you can check out more of his work on 247sports.com.